Our next speaker was supposed to be Kyleigh Turner, but she's unable to join us. So we have her lab mate, Levi Bird, filling in. Levi is a master's student advised by Heather Neve at Purdue University, and he will be talking to us about cow-calf reunions.
Yes, separation and reunion. First, I just want to start this out by saying how grateful I am for Kyleigh. I hope I do this presentation some justice in her eyes. Just an incredible individual, and she put so much work into this. So we've been sitting here, we've had our lunch. I want you to know, and you can raise your hand or you can think it in your head. When you look at this glass of water, is it half full? Is it half empty? Or do you see it as 2/3 empty as I do? What we have just made is a crude example of judgment bias. This is the current gold standard method to assess emotional state. And what I'm about to say is not disparaging judgment bias, because I am just a first-year master's student, and for me to make that claim would get me thrown out. But there are some limitations. Judgment bias testing takes training of the animals. It's time-consuming. And when asking a producer or anyone else like that what we can do on farm, they may not be keen to build a new facility for us. So ideally, we would have some practical indicators of emotional state to use on farm. Now, when looking at assessing emotional state on farm, we need to evaluate indicators in both positive and negative situations. And by that, I mean we need to be able to differentiate behaviors that we see during a positive situation and behaviors that we see during a negative situation. For example, one study looked at brushing a cow with a brush to create a positive affective state. And while they were doing this, they noted ear posture. And they noted that the ears were hanging while being brushed. So we then assumed that the cows, when hanging their ears, are in a positive affective state. However, we did not look at what would happen in a negative affective state. What would happen if they were in a negative situation? So let's just first define how do we identify positive and negative situations? Rather intuitive, I promise. Positive situations are those that animals clearly prefer and find motivating. Negative situations are those that they avoid. So one thing we know about dairy cows, they are highly motivated to be with their calf. So let's just take a second to look at this picture. Up on the top right, you'll see a gate covered in tires. This gate requires pressure to be applied to it in order to open. On the bottom, you'll see the cow's calf. And we can see through the study, this cow was willing to exert a great amount of force on this gate in order to open it and reunite. She immediately returns herself to the calf. And in this video, the calf immediately begins to attempt to suckle. So we can then infer that being with the calf is a positive situation for the cow, and further infer that being away from the calf is a negative situation. So that begs the question, can cow-calf contact be used as a model for testing novel indicators of emotional state? Well, we attempted to set out to do that. For our objective, we're going to explore the behavior of Holstein dairy cows in response to temporary separation and reunion with their calves, which may reveal possible behavioral indicators of affective state. For our study, cow-calf pairs, which we had 7 of, were housed in individual box stalls for 48 hours before testing. Now, we did have a range of 36 to 60 hours prior to testing. This was highly dependent on when the calf was born. For our outline, we split our testing time into 3 sections, 90 minutes each. We had a pre-separation phase where the cow and calf were both in the home pen. During separation, we removed the calf from the home pen and placed her down the hall in what we call the blue pens. And for reunion, we brought the calf back to the home pen. We recorded video continuously and observed the first 60 minutes of each period. And this is what we're referring to as the blue pen. The calf would come in and we recorded its behavior as well. But one thing we wondered while we were watching video was, what was the calf thinking? So let's dive into some of the behaviors we were looking at, just a piece of our ethogram. Some cow behavior observations we took were touching the calf, where the cow's nose was in contact with the calf. We also looked at allogrooming, where the cow's tongue was in contact with the calf. And calf checks, which we are trademarking this term. This is where the cow would reorient herself either by craning her neck 90 degrees or take a few small steps in order to better observe that calf and check on it. Now, one thing I would like to point out, you can see in this first image under touching how pristine and clean that back wall is, painstakingly pressure washed and sanitized. However, the cow, being an amateur artist, decided to paint us an abstract painting. Now, we've taken some time to discuss whether that was a Rorschach test or whether it was abstract art. I'll let you keep your observations to yourselves. Further cow behaviors we observed were exploring or searching, where the cow's nose was within 5 centimeters of any of the 5 solid planes in her environment. We explored rubbing. I promise she's not stuck in this video. The cow would rub on one of the surfaces within her environment. And self-grooming, where the cow's tongue was in contact with herself. For the calf behaviors, we looked at touching, where the calf's nose was in contact with the cow. We looked at play, where the calf was actively moving and 2 feet came off the ground. We also looked at suckling udder, where the calf was latched onto the cow's udder. For more of the calf, we looked at allogrooming, where the calf's tongue was in contact with the dam. Self-grooming, where the calf's tongue was in contact with itself. And exploring or searching, where the calf's nose was within 5 centimeters of one of the 5 solid planes of its environment. So let's start with the calves. How did they respond to separation and reunion? First thing we were able to note was that calves suckled when they reunited with their dam. So just to orient ourselves to this graph, on the x-axis, we have the 3 periods being pre-separation, separation, and reunion. And on the y-axis, we have suckle udder in minutes. As we can see, compared to pre-separation, because this behavior could not be performed during separation, suckling of the udder was higher during reunion than pre-separation. Now that made us wonder, the calf had contact with the cow all day prior to testing. So why was the calf suckling now? Was it a comfort behavior after separation? The knee-jerk response would be hunger, but hunger developing after 90 minutes of separation, we couldn't really justify that. Now on this slide, calves also did some exploring or searching, but they did not differ between periods. And the first thing I'd like to point out are the colors of these bars. These bars will be the same color throughout the rest of the presentation, indicating each period. So for pre-separation, we have a light blue. Separation, we have a light green. At reunion, we have a purple kind of color. I had to ask my lab mates what these colors were because I am colorblind. So on the y-axis, we have exploring duration in seconds. And again, we did not see any difference between periods. In fact, for all of the other behaviors, so on this graph on the x-axis, we have allogrooming, touching, self-grooming, and playing, and behavior duration on the y-axis in seconds. Again, noting allogrooming and touching were not possible during the separation phase, so you will not see a graph there. But we did not see much of a difference between periods during from the calf. In fact, a lot of what we saw was this. And that's a video. Did you see its head move slightly? So how did the cows respond to separation and reunion? Well, let's start with vocalizations. We were able to keep a tally of the vocalizations during the 3 periods. And while there was no significant difference between phases, we did note in number of count, there were more closed mouth vocalizations than open mouth. And so open mouth is generally associated with a distress call, whereas closed mouth is, we struggle to understand because we cannot understand the frequency. So what was interesting was that closed mouth vocalizations were shown in both positive and negative situations. Allogrooming increased during reunion compared to the pre-separation phase, as it was not possible during separation. Touching increased during reunion as well, with duration in seconds being on the y-axis. Calf checks increased at reunion compared to pre-separation. So when we lump these behaviors together, these 3, we begin to wonder, are these comfort-related behaviors for the cow? These are maternal behaviors, and one could even go as far to say they may reflect a return to a positive affective state. Now, for a series of behaviors that are increased during separation, exploring or searching, we could not split those 2 terms. Was she searching for the calf or was she exploring her environment? We couldn't define. But it did increase during separation. Rubbing increased during separation as well. And self-grooming tended to increase during separation. So when we take these 3 behaviors, non-maternal behaviors, could they indicate frustration or a negative affective state due to calf separation? It is important to note that the cow could still hear the calf, and this may have added to her frustration. So in summary, I'm running out of time. I'm good? Yes. Calves suckled more upon reunion, but other behaviors were not affected by separation or reunion compared to pre-separation. For cows, allogrooming, touching, and calf checks increased upon reunion compared to pre-separation. Exploring, searching, rubbing, and self-grooming increased during separation. This is an initial study. It had a very limited sample size, but it revealed potential of novel behavioral indicators of affective state that cows could be expressing and should be further explored. And with that, I want to thank everybody within this lab. I want to thank the Purdue ASREC dairy unit with the manager, Eric Bausman, the dairy staff that kindly assisted us in all of our research projects, and most importantly, our undergraduates. We would not have been able to get this done without our horde of undergraduates. So I want to thank you for your time, and I want to ask if you have any questions that we can take further.